When we returned from our week-long honeymoon, I immediately noticed strange noises coming from inside the house. Panic set in as I wondered if someone had broken in while we were away. "Did you hear that? Maybe someone's inside. Should we call the police?" I asked Harry, but he was completely unfazed. "It's fine," he reassured me, walking confidently inside. I quickly followed him, relieved to find it wasn't a burglar but my mother-in-law, Poppy, and sister-in-law, Arya. I was glad they weren't thieves, but I couldn't help but wonder why they were there. Harry had given them the house key, supposedly so they could look after it while we were gone, but I thought they'd leave once we returned. "It's getting late. You should go home," I suggested. "Let us have some peace today." Instead of leaving, they made themselves at home, occupying the living room and even taking showers without asking. I assumed they'd be gone the next morning, but when I came home from work, they were still there. At my breaking point, I told Harry it was time for them to leave. His response stunned me. "We're all living together now. If you have a problem with that, maybe you should leave." He was telling me to leave, but I didn't argue. I simply packed a bag with the essentials and walked out. My name is Ella, a 29-year-old magazine editor. 3 years ago, I met my husband, Harry, through a mutual friend. Before him, I hadn't been in many relationships, but his dependable and decisive nature drew me in. He said "I love you" first, and after 3 years together, he proposed. We married soon after. Planning our wedding and finding a new home was easy with Harry by my side. He handled everything smoothly, making it all feel effortless. Life in our new home with him was great, but it wasn't long before Poppy and Arya became my constant source of stress. Harry's father had passed away a decade ago, leaving Poppy and her 27-year-old daughter, Arya, as his remaining family. I had some concerns about getting along with them, as we barely interacted before the wedding, but once we were married, they began to intrude on our lives. Poppy called me almost every day, asking for more money. "Can you increase my allowance a little? I can't live properly on what you give me," she would complain. I told her to talk to Harry about it, but she would blame me, accusing me of being too stingy. Beyond that, Poppy expected me to visit more often, help with chores, and send her favorite foods each month, all while lecturing me over the phone. Arya wasn't any better. She'd show up unannounced when I was cooking, casually saying, "I was in the area, so I thought I'd drop by. Is dinner ready? I'm starving. Hurry up." She'd make herself comfortable on the sofa, wait for dinner, eat, and then leave without a word. I'd asked her repeatedly to give me a heads up before coming and not to drop by so often, but she refused to listen. "I'm just stopping by, don't worry about it," she'd shrug off. I couldn't be too harsh with her. After all, she was Harry's sister. When I complained to Harry, he did speak to them, but the situation never really changed. 6 months into our marriage, Harry and I decided to finally go on a honeymoon. Our hectic work schedules had delayed it, but we managed to take a week-long trip to Europe. It was exactly what we needed, a break from everything, but when we returned, we found ourselves faced with more than we expected. I heard noises coming from inside and immediately feared a burglary. "Did you hear that? Maybe someone's in the house. Should we call the police?" I asked, my heart racing, but Harry wasn't worried. "It's fine," he said calmly, walking inside. I followed, and there were Poppy and Arya. Relieved they weren't burglars, I was still confused. "What are you two doing here? Are you saying we're a burden?" "An empty house is a perfect target for burglars. We stayed here to protect it while you were away. You should be grateful," Poppy explained, almost as though she was doing us a favor. While we were away, Poppy and Arya had offered to take care of the house, so Harry had given them the key. I told him that he should have discussed it with me first, but he explained that they had asked him last minute, and there wasn't time to talk it over. The situation was done, so I tried to convince myself that at least they had kept the house safe. But as soon as I stepped inside, I saw the chaos they'd left behind. Every room was cluttered with their things. Arya's clothes filled the closet, and the rest were strewn across the floor. The living room was no better. Clothes, bags, remote controls, comic books, and various other items were scattered everywhere, not just on the table, but even on the floor. Exhausted from the flight and already frustrated with the mess, I still tried to hold it together. What bothered me most, though, was that Poppy and Arya had stayed longer than I expected. I thought they'd leave as soon as we came back, but they hadn't. "It's getting late," I said, trying to remain polite. "If you don't go home now, let us relax for the evening." But they didn't leave. Instead, they made themselves even more at home, taking over the living room and even using the shower without asking. I hoped they'd leave the next day, But by the time I got back from work in the morning, they were still there. I had had enough. It's time to go home, I told them. We're family, so you don't have to mind us, they responded nonchalantly. Just pretend we're not here. But the problem was, I couldn't ignore them. I was the one who cooked, cleaned, and did all the chores. If I didn't do something, they would stay as long as they wanted, and I couldn't let that happen. So, I decided to ask Harry to step in and ask them to leave. While I was cleaning my room, I noticed that one of my perfume bottles was missing. It was a limited edition fragrance I had been careful with, and it cost over $300. I panicked and immediately asked Poppy about it, but she had no idea what I was talking about. When I asked Arya, she casually pulled the bottle from her bag and handed it to me. To my shock, the bottle was almost empty. I had only used it sparingly, and there should have been at least 6% left. It smells great, doesn't it? My friend liked it too, so I lent it to her, she said nonchalantly. I couldn't hold back my frustration any longer. Why would you use it without asking? That's theft. Didn't anyone teach you that stealing is wrong? What's the big deal? I only borrowed it for a little while. You're overreacting. If you borrowed it, then why don't you return what you used? I demanded. Fine, I'll give you half the money for it, she replied, clearly unfazed. I don't want your money, I want the perfume back the way it was. Why are you making such a fuss over a stupid bottle of perfume? I looked it up, and it's not even that expensive, she said, scrolling through her phone. Holy cow, why is it so expensive? She muttered, shocked at the price. I use it sparingly because it's valuable to me, I said, my patience wearing thin. I never imagined I'd have a relative who would enter my room and take my things without permission. Just as we were arguing, Harry walked in. What's going on here? Arya borrowed my perfume without asking, and now she's acting like it's no big deal, I explained. I left them arguing in the living room and went to tell Harry what had happened. I was fed up and told him I needed him to make them leave. Don't get worked up over something so small, Harry said dismissively, and I haven't told you yet, but they're going to be living here with us. I stood there, speechless. What do you mean, living here? My mom's house is old, and parts of it are falling apart. She was thinking about moving, and we have extra space here, so we decided it made sense for her to stay with us and save some money. Why didn't you talk to me about this? Do you own this house? I'm paying the mortgage too, so don't blame me. Mom decided to sell her place anyway. We're living together now, and if you don't like it, you can leave. He had made this decision without consulting me and then told me to leave if I didn't like it. I felt my feelings for him begin to fade. Fine, I said, packing a bag with only the essentials. Harry didn't try to stop me but called me immature for running away after a fight. As I packed, Poppy and Arya smirked at me, and they locked the door behind me as I walked out. I had no intention of going back. I checked into a hotel and called my boss, asking for a few days off. During that time, I searched for an apartment and explained the situation to my parents. They were shocked and asked what I planned to do next. I told them I was getting a divorce. In the meantime, Harry texted me, when you're ready to apologize, you can come back. Mom and Arya say they'll forgive you. When I called him to ask for a divorce, he initially resisted, saying, you're going to divorce me over something like this? Just put up with it a little longer. But when he saw I was serious, he finally agreed. The divorce was finalized in 6 months. We moved quickly through the division of property, and I gave him the house. We had been married for less than a year. Friends and coworkers were concerned and asked if it was my fault. I used to avoid discussing it, but eventually, I shared everything. They were all shocked. That's impossible, they said. I'm sorry you had to go through all that, my friend said sympathetically. It was comforting to hear, and their support made me feel a little better. After the divorce, I threw myself into work more than ever. I took on 3 times the usual number of projects, even helping out colleagues who were overwhelmed. My boss was concerned about my workload, but I found solace in staying busy, even though the memories of the painful time haunted me, and I started blaming myself. At least work gave me a sense of purpose while I focused on mastering my tasks. 5 months after the divorce, Harry called. I had left most of my things behind when I left, so I figured it might be about that. When I answered, he didn't get straight to the point, which struck me as unusual since he was always direct. He asked me how I was doing and if I was living alone. I didn't want to waste time, so I asked him outright why he was calling. He said he wanted to get back together. I wasn't interested, so I immediately refused and tried to end the call, but he stopped me. Wait, "There's something I haven't told you," he said. "What?" I responded, not hiding my impatience. "I'm busy, so hurry up. Can you lend me some money? I'm struggling to pay the mortgage," he asked. He explained that he was having a hard time because he expected a raise, but it never came. His current job had no future opportunities, so he tried to change jobs, but the new one paid less. He was still trying to adjust. Despite his situation, I didn't want to lend him any money. I told him not to call me again. "You're still single, right?" he asked, sounding almost smug. "No one will take an older divorcee. You'd better get back together with me." "No, thank you," I said flatly. Before hanging up, I couldn't understand how I had ever fallen in love with him, and I was disappointed in my own poor judgment. After that, Harry, Poppy, and Arya began harassing me. I learned from their conversations that they believed Harry had a good income, thanks to us buying a new house and having a big wedding. When they didn't get the money they expected, they assumed I was the one stopping Harry from giving it to them. They were thrilled when I left, thinking their lives would become easier. But when reality hit and Harry's income was smaller than they had imagined, they panicked and called me for help. They thought men made more money than women, but in reality, my salary was higher than his. I considered blocking them, but Harry knew where I worked, so I was worried he might call or show up at my office. To avoid conflict, I answered a few of his calls. Each time, he complained about Poppy and John spending too much money and that he had run out of savings. Poppy and Arya had started part-time jobs, but they were still struggling because of their spending habits. It was always about money. One day, I decided that the next time he called, I would tell him that I was struggling too, hoping he'd stop contacting me. Sure enough, when he called, he asked again for a loan to cover his mortgage. I responded, "Actually, I'm planning to resign soon. I've spent most of my savings, so I need you to lend me money. If you think I'm lying, you can ask someone at work." He simply replied, "I see," and hung up. That was the last time he called me. When I shared this with a friend, she told me Harry's situation was worse than I realized. He had gotten a lower-paying job, and most of his salary went toward the mortgage. Arya had gotten involved in an affair with her part-time job manager. His wife found out and sued her for the affair, and after investigating, it came out that Arya had known he was married and still pursued him. The manager and his wife divorced, and Arya was held responsible for a large amount of compensation. She lost her job and friends after the news spread. Harry's family ended up paying the mortgage and covering the debt from the lawsuit. Poppy complained about how her friends had grandchildren, while her own children were still single and struggling. Harry, meanwhile, complained to a friend that he was now single and no one was interested in him. He had lost weight, looked disheveled, and appeared much older than his age. No woman would want him. His friend couldn't help but roll her eyes. As for me, I'd been doing well. I founded a web magazine with a university friend, using most of my savings to get the business started. It's a small venture, but I'm happy to take on the challenges that come with it. I used to be intimidated by new things, but after everything I've been through, I'm now more confident and capable of managing obstacles. I also met someone new at work. He respects my boundaries and gives me the space I need. Thanks to him, I've realized that Harry wasn't a strong leader, just a selfish person. 4 months after the divorce, I thought I would never be able to love again, but now, I'm excited about the future. I've learned to cherish the happiness I have found in my new life.